Dear friends, this is an edited and revised version of a lecture that I gave on Zoom to an audience of friends and members of the Anthroposophical Society in America. The lecture occurred on April 10th, 2025, as part of the American Society's Easter Festival, Anthroposophy Ever Anew. The lecture was an offering to the Society from the North American section for the Literary Arts and Humanities of the School for Spiritual Science. I gave a second lecture, a companion lecture, also on Zoom, for an audience at the Front Range Anthroposophical Cafe on June 27th, 2025. These two lectures complement each other. As I said, they arise directly from the research, meetings, and conferences of the North American section for the Literary Arts and Humanities. And most especially, they arise from the regular ongoing meetings of the section friends and members who have met in Northern California since 2010. All right, dear friends, welcome. I'll start my talk today with a remarkable photograph, and I'll close with a poem by Novalis. This is a photograph of a wood carving, and the wood carving shows John at the foot of the cross, supporting Mary, the mother of Jesus. We see a similar representation on the Eisenheimer altar. Now, you may not be familiar with the wood carving I am showing you here, but I'm sure you are all familiar with this famous masterpiece by Grunewald, and I will say more about the wood carving in a moment. The Eisenheimer altar depicts the same drama as the wood carving. We see John the Evangelist supporting Mary, the mother of Jesus, and over here on the other side is John the Baptist, whom, as you know, was not alive at the time of the crucifixion. Now, please contemplate this for a moment, since it takes us right into the heart of our topic today. We also have this beautiful painting of the resurrection on the altarpiece, and I'd say it's good to behold this at this time of year, is it not? I should probably end my lecture right now, and we could all just meditate silently, because really, everything that needs to be said in relation to my lecture topic has been said visually in these three pictures that I just showed you. Here is the wood carving again. Because I am a student of Novalis, I find the photograph of this wood carving to be exceptionally unique and moving, especially for our theme today, more than 100 years after Rudolf Steiner's death and close to Easter. Let me explain. The photograph that I am showing you is part of a collection of photographs documenting the interior and exterior of the castle Siebeneichen near Dresden. The castle Siebeneichen was in the possession of the extended family of the poet Novalis. Novalis spent time here with his family and his cousins as a youngster and later as a young man, both before and after he had named himself Novalis. Now, we studied this in our section in 2021, and I made a video of the interior and exterior of the castle, which you can watch if you are interested. As I said, this relates very intimately to our theme today. Portions of the famous works by Novalis that we've studied in our section meetings, such as the novel Heinrich von Ofterdingen, and Hymns to the Night, and the fairy tale of Eros and Fable, these important works by Novalis were written or revised here at Siebeneichen. When you look at the pictures of the castle and the surroundings, well, I don't know about you, but I can imagine myself moving about here and feeling inspired by the spirit of place to create poetry and fairy tales. And I can imagine Novalis walking in and outside the castle, and imagine him imagining the details of his novel, Heinrich von Ofterdingen, for example. The spirit of this landscape, at least in my imagination, inspires a feeling of wonder and a reverence for the mystery of Novalis, whom Rudolf Steiner talked about so often. As I said, the wood carving from the castle visited often by Novalis, along with the pictures from the Isenheimer altar, these are visual presentations of my topic today, and that topic is Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Karmic biography of Novalis and its significance for our 21st century. Now, that is really two topics, is it not? One side of the colon focuses on the past, the early 20th century, and the other side focuses on our present fluid moment, and that is always hovering, always changing, always annoying, and always shape-shifting. How do we weave a relationship between the two? Well, Novalis thought that the most important task of a poet, such as himself or Rudolf Steiner, is to weave poetic continuity between the past and the present moment, so that the ever-passing present moment can inspire hope and give birth to golden futures. The poet makes sense of the apparent chaos of our human experience, according to Novalis. The poet inspires a healthy sense of wonder, which is necessary if we want to weave together the upper and lower worlds in a healthy way, by means of our magical idealist abilities to conjure with poetry and art. A healthy sense of wonder is childlike in its wise innocence, which is one reason why Novalis talked about fairy tales all the time, and one reason why he called the fairy tale the highest form of literature, higher than philosophy. A fairy tale is powerful magic. The fairy tales we wonder about, they can make us sick or they can make us healthy. Novalis underscores this magical idealist appreciation for fairy tale everywhere in his writings, which is why I like to say, following Novalis, that the fairy tale is mightier than philosophy. Now, let me show you that picture of the Isenheimer altar panel again, and as I do so, I'll tell you a story, a fairy tale, really. It should be of great interest to us as anthroposophists. This story relates to the wood carving, and to the castle, and to Novalis, and to John the Evangelist, and even to John the Baptist, and to Rudolf Steiner, and to our theme. It is a story about a philosopher. Once upon a time, Novalis had a relative who owned Castle Siebeneichen, where we found that wood carving. This relative took the young boy, Hans Fichte, under his care and fostered his education and gave him the chance to become the great philosopher Johann Fichte. Now, my friends, this is the Fichte whom we hear so much about from Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner wrote his doctoral dissertation on Fichte, as you know. But I don't think Rudolf Steiner mentioned this story I am going to tell you anywhere in his doctoral thesis. This story of Fichte relates very directly to our theme of karma. It comes from a book by another relative of Novalis, Monica von Miltitz, who owned the castle Siebeneichen in the 20th century. She was a direct student of Rudolf Steiner, an anthroposophist, and a good friend of Marie Steiner and Albert Steffen. Marie and Albert visited her at Siebeneichen, but I don't know if Marie's husband Rudolf ever accompanied her. In one of those books, she shared this tale about Fichte, and I will now read her words. One Sunday, Ernst Haubold, the owner of Castle Siebeneichen, visited his sister, who was married to a count in another village. Naturally, the distance required for the journey caused him to miss the morning church services. That was distressing to the good Protestant, who felt himself obligated to observe his churchly duties. This was even more distressing because the church was noted for its preacher, famous far and wide. But the sermon proved not completely lost, because in the town square he encountered a young boy herding cows. This young boy, due to his quick intellect and exceptional gifts of memory, he was able to repeat the entire sermon with youthful liveliness and full detail. Ernst Haubold was so impressed by the exceptional barefoot boy preacher who was tending cows that he advised the official in the village to find a new cow herder. The young boy, Johann Fichte, for such was the young barefoot cowherder's name. He should instead be destined for higher learning, and perhaps one day become a preacher or a learned man. So it was quickly arranged that Ernst Haubold should undertake the care and fosterage of the boy, who was provided for amply, even after the death of his benefactor. So, my friends, that was the story of Fichte and how Fichte became Fichte. But after the death of Fichte's benefactor in 1774, Novalis's father took over the care and education of Fichte in his cousin's stead. So we have this very interesting fairy tale karmic connection between Fichte and Novalis, do we not? Fichte, too, was a guest at this castle, and maybe he saw that wood carving. Now, I started with that photograph and anecdote today because, number one, it adds some wonderful human reality to what can be a somewhat academic, and for some of us, an over-discussed topic, Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Karmic biography of Novalis. And number two, the castle is something you can check out for yourself if you want to wonder about it in that video that I mentioned. But three, most importantly, two topics of wonderful importance to Rudolf Steiner come together here remarkably in this photo of a wood carving from a castle that the poet Novalis knew quite well. These two topics are John the Evangelist, or perhaps we should call him John Lazarus, and Novalis. One might say that here we find the key to Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophy and Christology, right here in the castle, when we look at this wood carving. Now let me explain. Rudolf Steiner spoke of the intimate karmic interweaving of John and Novalis in his very last public statement, his last address. And he did so for the very first time. Let's quickly hear again those challenging words that Rudolf Steiner spoke on the eve of Michaelmas 1924. They are words that inspire a deep sense of wonder. And we have shown how in the course of time the being who was present in Elijah appeared again at the very most important moment of human evolution, appeared again so that Christ Jesus himself could give him the initiation he was to receive for the evolution of mankind. For the being of Elijah appeared again in Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure, as you will have understood from my book, Christianity as Mystical Fact. And now, my friends, I've had the experience in our late 20th century and now in our early 21st century that this statement by Rudolf Steiner from the last address is often read and assimilated as just one more piece of information, one more factoid. File it under N for Novalis, or maybe J for John. No sense of wonder that Rudolf Steiner has just said something truly astonishing and wonderful. Now, I do suppose it is understandable that for those of us who have grown up with unlimited access to anthroposophical literature, it is understandable that we don't feel a sense of wonder or catch the apparent error in Rudolf Steiner's penultimate words, that the being of Elijah appeared again in Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure. But persons in the carpentry shop on the eve of Michaelmas 1924, those long-time students who heard these words for the very first time, they were shocked and upset when their teacher spoke. They turned to each other in wonderment because they thought that the doctor, who was so clearly exhausted and perhaps even dying, and indeed he was dying, they thought that he had made a mistake. Some were even censorious. They knew their facts. They had studied the books and the lectures, and some of them had been present from the very beginning of the doctor's lecturing. And based on what they knew as very good students, some of them concluded that here he has made an error. Here he has gotten it wrong. Why do I say that? Well, time and time again over the years, those long-time students of Rudolf Steiner had heard or read that the spiritual lineage of the eternal individuality known as Novalis was Adam, Phineas, Elijah, John the Baptist, Raphael, Novalis. Now let's make sure we've got that straight. The incarnations of the eternal individuality known as Novalis, according to Rudolf Steiner's reading of the Akashic Chronicle, include Adam from the book of Genesis, Phineas from the book of Numbers, the prophet Elijah from the book of Kings, John the Baptist, the painter Raphael, and Friedrich von Hardenberg, the poet Novalis. But Rudolf Steiner just said in his Eve of Michaelmas last address that the being of Elijah appeared again as Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure. His audience at the time, as I said, was very surprised, if not shocked and disturbed. They did not just file this information away as another factoid of anthroposophy. They wondered deeply about it. They recognized that this statement was flat out wrong. If you look at the very important early book, Christianity as Mystical Fact, well, no, you will not understand the truth of what Rudolf Steiner has just told you, as he stated, because that information is not there. Not if you read the book literally for what it says. Maybe if you read it poetically or imaginatively, you will find something, but not if you read it scientifically for what the printed word says literally on the page. Up until this moment of revelation in the last address, the incarnational lineage of Elijah, which included John the Baptist, had never included John Lazarus, the disciple whom the Lord loved. John, who became John the Evangelist, who wrote the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. The two Johns, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, were distinct. According to the teachings, the incarnational lineage of the eternal individuality known as Novalis had never included John the Evangelist, John who stood at the foot of the cross and received the mother of Jesus into his care and protection. Now, as we know, Rudolf Steiner was not able to complete the last address. He retired to his sickbed and he died 6 months later. During the time of Rudolf Steiner's sickness, close associates tactfully questioned him about the last address, and he gave them some equivocal answers, and he told Marie Steiner, he gave her orders, that she was not to publish the incomplete lecture until he was able to explain the missing part. It appears that he wanted to do so. It appears that he had plans to do so, and that he intended this last address to be the beginning of a new phase of his karma research, maybe. But he did not have time. He sickened and died. Nevertheless, before he died, he intimated that this subject of the two Johns and Novalis would be extremely important for the future. And that future is now. He just did not have the opportunity to explain why or how it would be important, and he left his students puzzled and wondering about it. So my task today, in the time remaining for this talk, is to try to explain what might have been included in that second part of the last address, if Rudolf Steiner had been able to continue. Now, that sounds like a bold, if not very stupid or foolish Parsifalian statement. And you might wonder if I've lost my mind. But I will speak only about texts that either Rudolf Steiner or his intimate pupils left behind for us to read and wonder about. Literary texts that point to important mysteries that apparently Rudolf Steiner did want us to wonder about. So let's start with his most intimate and longtime associate, Marie von Sievers. In an essay written to commemorate the last address, Marie Steiner remarked that Rudolf Steiner ended his last address by once again pointing to an important, if not the most important, mystery in all of his teaching, which she called a red thread that ran through all of Rudolf Steiner's revelations of wisdom, the mystery of Novalis, Raphael, John. To trace this red thread of Novalis, Raphael, John that Marie Steiner identified, we need to go back to the beginning of Rudolf Steiner's work in Theosophy, to that very important, exciting, youthful first decade of the 20th century, when Rudolf Steiner began his lecturing as a teacher in the Theosophical Society. Surprising, if not scandalizing, many of his friends when he made that decision. They thought, much like his audience for the last address, that he'd made a mistake, an error. Here he has gotten it wrong. So I'm talking about the very important and revolutionary first decade when Rudolf Steiner and Marie von Sievers inspired the anthroposophical movement, working together as partners, shoulder to shoulder. We need to start there and move forward to the last address if we want to follow the red thread of Novalis, Raphael, John. Footnote: I'm not going to discuss the other karmic aspects of Lazarus John, which would include Hiram, the temple builder, and Christian Rosenkreutz, and the two Michael streams, earthly and heavenly, and other topics such as how the Buddha and Rudolf Steiner's concept of bodhisattvas and the Mercury sphere add a very important level of complexity to this topic of Lazarus John. That would make this a much longer lecture, and probably, my friends, several lectures or even a course or two. Here I'm only going to follow the red thread, Novalis, Raphael, John. At the very beginning of Rudolf Steiner's teaching activity within the context of the Theosophical Society in 1901-1902, just 100 years after the death of Novalis, at that time, Rudolf Steiner began to present what he called an apology or a justification of Christianity within the context of Theosophy by means of his interpretation of the Gospel of John. These early lectures were later collected and published as the book Christianity as Mystical Fact. Chapter 7 of that book discusses the raising of Lazarus, and it is a tale that biblical scholars still wonder about. In those early years of the 20th century, when Rudolf Steiner became associated with the Theosophical Society, he began right from the get-go to lay the groundwork for his Christology. He was always a reformer within Theosophy, and he was clear about his intentions. He told everyone those intentions when he accepted an official position in Theosophy. He told them that he would become a Theosophist under two conditions. Number one, that he must speak his own mind, and two, that Marie von Sievers must join him as an intimate colleague and collaborator, as a partner. The Theosophical Society agreed, Marie von Sievers was already active and well known in Theosophy, and Rudolf Steiner had made a grand impression right from the start. Thus, a door was opened for a very significant event, and that event is really the reason that we are Zooming together today, my friends, karmically speaking. Otherwise, we just wouldn't be here, and I would not be doing this. Marie von Sievers posed an important question, a question that the prior lectures on Christianity, the lectures on European mystics, and the early work with the Gospel of John had made possible. She asked, might it be possible to impart spiritual wisdom in a way more in keeping with European spiritual life and with consideration of the Christ impulse? Having received this question, Rudolf Steiner felt that he could now do more than just offer an apology or justification of Christianity within Theosophy, as he had been doing previously. Marie von Sievers' question unsealed the door to a complete discussion of Christian mystery wisdom by Rudolf Steiner. Her question made it possible for him to teach Theosophy in a radically new way. Accordingly, Rudolf Steiner intensified his work with the Gospel of John and the figure of John that he had presented in the earlier lectures. To follow our red thread, Novalis, Raphael, John, Rudolf Steiner, having received the all-important question from Marie, and remember, he always needed to be asked a question, or had to be asked to do something. Otherwise, he just kept his mouth shut. Probably a wise Michaelic strategy. But having received that question, Rudolf Steiner began to talk about founding a John Society within Theosophy, a Gospel of John department, or a section, whose task would be, quote, to make known to the widest circles of Theosophists the deep mysteries that lie concealed in the Gospel of John, unquote. And in a lecture given July 11th, 1904, for example, he pointed out that, quote, a movement will be born out of the school of the Theosophical Society that will bring a true understanding of Christianity. Rudolf Steiner and Marie von Sievers jointly organized their first Novalis celebration at the 7th General Assembly of the German section of Theosophy in October 1908. Their emphasis on Novalis also put an emphasis on the Gospel of John, inasmuch as it is in that Gospel that we confront the mystery of the Word. And both Rudolf Steiner and Marie von Sievers worked out of a deep sense of wonder for the mystery of the Word. A deep sense of wonder and reverence for the mystery of the Word inspired all their collaborative activities. Of that there can be no doubt. At the conference in 1908, Marie von Sievers recited the Hymns to the Night for the first time, and Rudolf Steiner presented the biography of Novalis. My friends, you must imagine that within the general context of Theosophy as a world movement, that this was quite an unusual emphasis and offering, and it left people wondering. Now, I should say, by the way, you can hear a recitation of Hymns to the Night in San Francisco in May at the section conference, if you're interested. Canadian violinist Emanuel Vukovic and I will perform this important poem in my fresh translation for our 21st century. And this is an open conference, which means you can choose whatever portions you want to attend on a donation-at-the-door basis. Okay, the red thread continues. At Christmas 1908, a second Novalis celebration occurred, and again with emphasis on the word and by clear implication on the Gospel of John and John the Evangelist, who wrote that Gospel. This is the well-known lecture with the title, The Christmas Mystery, Novalis the Seer. At this Christmas event in 1908, Maury van Sievers again recited Novalis's poetry. The red thread continues. On January 6, 1909, the 12th day of Christmas, the Feast of Epiphany that commemorates the baptism in the Jordan, Rudolf Steiner spoke of the Novalis Raphael John the Baptist Elijah secret for the first time. And again, it is Rudolf Steiner's steadfast partner and artistic collaborator, Maury van Sievers, who should be recognized for her contribution and inspiration. Now, I will read this quote by Maury van Sievers, since Mary Stuart Adams referred to it in her lead-off lecture for this festival series that began in March. It is karmically quite significant that Mary made that reference. By doing so, she pointed us to this very important moment mentioned by Maury Steiner when Rudolf Steiner spoke of the Novalis Raphael John the Baptist Elijah secret for the first time. And here is the passage in Maury Steiner's words. It was during the time, 1908-1909, that Rudolf Steiner encouraged me to step out more and more with recitation. At that time, I was trying to wrestle my way through to Novalis. I told him that it would not be easy for me, that I had not yet found the key to Novalis. He advised me to put myself in the mood of the holy nuns. Well, the nuns did not help me. On the contrary, I did not know what to do with them. Then suddenly it all brightened up. Raphael's paintings surrounded me. The child shone in his mother's arms, with his world-apprehending eyes. I said to Rudolf Steiner, the nuns didn't do it for me, but someone else came to my assistance, Raphael. Now Novalis is completely transparent to me. A glow came over Rudolf Steiner's mild face. A few days later, he gave us, for the first time, the Novalis Raphael John the Baptist Elijah secret. So Maury Steiner is referring to the event on January 6, 1909 that I just referenced. The red thread continues. The laying of the foundation stone for the first Goetheanum in September 1913 occurred on the hill in Dornach when the building planned for construction in Munich could not be built. And here again, behind the scenes of the outward drama, we find the red thread of Novalis Raphael John. Rudolf Steiner finishes his Christology lectures with the Fifth Gospel series, and he lays the foundation stone for a new mystery temple of the Word. Dear friends, what I am attempting to suggest by very briefly tracing this red thread of Novalis, Raphael, John during the years 1901 to 1913 is that the red thread that runs through these years finds its endpoint in the last address. The last address, contrary to the shock and surprise that it engendered in its audience, was a logical culmination of the artistic work and research done by Rudolf Steiner and Marie von Sievers during those early, youthful theosophical years. I will explain that more fully in a moment, but first I need to mention another very important topic that strengthens our red thread, and that is the concept spiritual economy. The years of this theosophical decade that I am briefly sketching were also the years during which Rudolf Steiner began to discuss the concept of spiritual economy, so important to his Christology, as you know, and in this instance so crucially important to understanding the mystery of Lazarus John. Spiritual economy is a concept that Rudolf Steiner used to explain the profound complexities of rebirth and reincarnation. Footnote: I'll do another lecture video on the topic of spiritual economy in the future. Currently, I only want to draw your attention to the concept of spiritual economy. As I said, this discussion of spiritual economy occurs in the context of the Theosophical decade, during which Rudolf Steiner was developing his Christology and his reading of the Karmic biography of the eternal individuality Novalis, and his teaching concerning the reappearance of the etheric Christ, and he was dealing with the events that led to the separation from Theosophy. It's all woven together. In respect to an understanding of the significance of the Karmic biography of Novalis, however, spiritual economy is the all-important concept that is needed for an understanding of the mystery, especially in respect to Lazarus John. An understanding of spiritual economy as a higher chapter or next developmental stage in karma research is essential if we want to make sense of the statement in 1924 in the last address that the being of Elijah appeared again in Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure. To return to my earlier remark about the continuity of the red thread. In the last address of 1924, Rudolf Steiner began again. He began again, just as he had at the Christmas conference, just as he had in 1902 when he became a Theosophist, just as he did when he split from Theosophy, and I could mention more examples from his activities in the 19th century. He had that ability to begin again. Rudolf Steiner had a knack for dying and becoming. Rudolf Steiner began again in the last address by taking up the red thread Novalis, Raphael, John in respect to spiritual economy, because the next step of his karma teaching required a nuanced understanding of karma and reincarnation based on spiritual economy. And if the fundamental significance of spiritual economy as a higher chapter of the reincarnation teaching by Rudolf Steiner is not so widely discussed today, perhaps, it is probably because Rudolf Steiner only hinted at this new chapter in 1924. He did not have time to do much more. It was only a mere gesture of a new beginning. What I'd like to point out today is that he had planted the seed for this new beginning in that first decade of his activity. If we follow our red thread, the last address is not a surprising new departure or an error or a mistake. It is a logical developmental step. It is a new beginning, but as with the growth of a plant, it is also an intensification of what has appeared before. As I finish up here today, and I'm almost done, let's turn to an example and another story. Let's look at Phineas, one of the incarnations of the Novalis individuality identified by Rudolf Steiner. This example will bring home the second part of our topic. Why is this important for our 21st century? Here is a modern representation of Phineas. Phineas can be very difficult to approach, especially for our 21st century. Phineas acts out of anger. He commits a double murder by impaling two lovers at the same time with a single spear. He impales their naked bodies while they lie in bed making love. He did this to ensure the continuation of the mission of the Hebrews, to prepare a suitable physical body for the incarnation of the solar Christ avatar, according to Rudolf Steiner. This angry and fiery young man, one could also call him a fanatic or a zealot. This choleric, martial, priestly man was known for his sense of righteous purpose and righteous self-discipline. This also could be said of the prophet Elijah. Phineas, Elijah, John the Baptist, or even John the Evangelist, if you think about Patmos. These were powerful personalities. They were individuals fired with a righteous zeal, if not righteous anger, for a righteous prophetic mission. You can read about the mission of anger in one of those lectures from the Theosophical decade of the Anthroposophical movement that I've been discussing. For example, the mission of anger, given on December 5th, 1909. 1909, woven right in there with our red thread. As I said, these themes all weave together in this very exciting first decade of Rudolf Steiner's teaching during those years of his collaboration with Marie von Sievers within the context of Theosophy. It is perhaps difficult to reconcile Phineas or other fiery individuals filled with righteous anger with a portrait of the poet Novalis. When we look at the famous portrait of Novalis, or when we look at the self-portrait of the painter Raphael, it is impossible to see an individual whose life is consumed by a gesture of righteous anger in pursuit of a righteous cause. Anger, rage, murderous zeal, these qualities are not to be seen in the faces of Raphael or Novalis. Instead, We see qualities such as beauty, truth, kindness, playful eroticism, artistic grace, humor, fashion, compassion, and a sense of wonder. We see an almost childlike sense of wonder. We see in those portraits a spirit whose life is dedicated to beauty, truth, and goodness. And we see a spirit who serves those three goddesses by deeds of poetry and art. Here we stand in wonder at the workings of a spiritual process, a transformation or new beginning that the poet Novalis called Ordo Inversus. And I talked about Ordo Inversus when I lectured in Dornach last fall. It is a term that Novalis plays with when he discusses the philosophy of Fichte. And I mentioned Fichte for that very reason at the beginning of my talk. Johann Fichte, the philosopher, is an important supporting strand in the red thread that we have been tracing. Hardenberg develops his ideas about Ordo Inversus philosophically during the time that he was courting Sophie, and this is the time when he was also studying the philosophy of Fichte intensively. But when he matures and finds his higher individuality as Novalis, he leaves philosophy on the bookshelves and turns his attention to what he considers to be the highest form of literary expression, poetry and fairy tale. What does this mean for our theme? Well, with the beheading of John the Baptist and the initiation of Lazarus shortly afterwards, the fundamental character of the mission of the Phineas Elijah individuality changed. It transformed. It began again. Anger transformed into compassion. And again, I refer you to that lecture December 5th, 1909, The Mission of Anger, as one example among many. This transformation, or Ordo Inversus, as I am calling it, following Novalis, is the key to the poet Novalis, or to Raphael, and to John, both Johns, I would say. It is the key to understanding why the karmic biography of Novalis can be at all important for our 21st century. And it is the key to understanding why Novalis is so foundationally critical for an understanding of Rudolf Steiner's Christology and anthroposophy. The Lazarus-John problem, or the karmic interweaving of the Elijah individuality with John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, accentuates something wonderful, miraculous, really. Beauty, a sense for beauty, or artistic or poetic intelligence. This now characterizes the work of the Novalis individuality, as this individuality continues its future earthly tasks and incarnations. Art and self-initiated artistic creativity in service to beauty, world, and word. These are the signal characteristics of Novalis Raphael John as that individuality moves forward from the turning point in time. This is what makes Rudolf Steiner's karmic research into Novalis so important for our 21st century. Beauty. and all that is implied when we speak about beauty, and when we show a reverent concern for beauty in a spiritually artistic and enlivened way. This is why our theme is at all significant today. Righteous anger transforms into love and compassion. Zeal and dedication for a disciplined, righteous mission transforms into love for beauty, goodness, and truth. It transforms into poetry and art in service to word and world. Now, it is easy to recognize this in respect to the biographies of Novalis and Raphael. And I'll give you one more example of this Ordo Inversus in relation to John. According to Rudolf Steiner's last address, the being of Elijah Novalis intermingled with the being of Lazarus at the time of the initiation of Lazarus by the Christ. At that point, Lazarus became known as Lazarus John. Lazarus becomes John, the disciple whom the Lord loved. This is the John who stands at the foot of the cross on Good Friday. This is the John who received directly from Jesus on the cross the responsibility to care for and to protect the mother. This is the John who wrote the Gospel of John, so critically important and essential to Rudolf Steiner's mission in the early 20th century. And this is the John who wrote the book of Revelation when he was a prisoner on Patmos, having been exiled there by the Romans when the Romans were unable to martyr him by boiling him in oil as they had intended. And this is also the John who, after he left Patmos, spent the final years of his life at Ephesus, where there was an early Christian church. In Ephesus, during those late years of John's life, he still preached and participated in community, and according to legend, the sum total of his preaching were these 5 words: "Little children, love one another." 5 words which he repeated over and over, and people wondered about it. Perhaps they wondered about it even more when they heard the book of Revelation with its fiery prophetic words that put the fear of God in everyone, words which are much more in keeping with the martial, fiery, zealous character of an Elijah or a Phinehas. Well, contrast those martial, fiery, prophetic, zealous, angry words of John on Patmos with the final loving words of John that John repeated over and over until people got confused and weary and said to him impatiently, "Venerable sir, why do you repeat the same thing over and over? Why don't you tell us one of your fiery, frightening stories so that we may cower and obey and learn to be good? We are sinners. Tell us a cruel fairy tale. We are tired of hearing you preach this simple message over and over. It is making us weary." But according to legend, John replied, "If this alone is done, it is enough. Little children, love one another." And then he died and departed and left them all wondering what he meant. Little children, love one another. So, to return for the last time to our familiar red thread, and I'm really almost done, I want to close my talk by reading Song 1 from Songs of the Spirit by Novalis. And if we apply our poetic intelligence, then this poem will answer the question quite clearly that is in the title of my talk. Why is Rudolf Steiner's karmic research into Novalis significant for our 21st century? Look again at these pictures of the painter Raphael and the poet Novalis. What do you see? Well, I don't know about you, but I see reverence and wonder for the facts of the world. I see a wise childishness that, according to eyewitness testimonies, made a profound impression on anyone who came under the influence of Novalis. This sense of wonder and wise childishness is the main point. Here are some famous words by Aristotle about philosophy. They speak directly to our theme. Why is this stuff about Novalis that Rudolf Steiner keeps talking about? Why is it important for anthroposophy or for anyone at all in our 21st century? So here are some words from our teacher, Rudolf Steiner. Astonishment and the impulse towards knowledge on the one hand, and conscience on the other. These are living signs of the spiritual world. These phenomena cannot be explained without bringing in the spiritual worlds. The less one can feel wonder, the less advanced is the soul. So now I will close with the Song 1 from Songs of the Spirit by Novalis in a fresh translation. And as you listen to it, think about John and Raphael and about our red thread that leads to the last address. And if you wonder about this poem, then in that way you will find the key to Novalis and the key to his importance to Rudolf Steiner, and perhaps also the key to why Rudolf Steiner returned again and again to the red thread Novalis Raphael John that Marie Steiner emphasized. Even in his last address, his dying words. In this poem, you may even find the key to Rudolf Steiner's Christology, if you wonder long enough. So I won't take any questions after I read this final poem. I have talked long enough, and I'm sure you're all tired, but you're all warmly invited to bring your questions to one of our regular ongoing section meetings for the Literary Arts and Humanities, or, if you want, to a section event or conference, such as the one coming up in San Francisco very soon. We will be highlighting Novalis and Hymns to the Night, and I've even prepared this translation of the fairy tale of Eros and Fable. Here's the poem. What would I have been without you? Without you, what would I not become? Marked by fear and worry, alone in a world of one. Nothing known for certain, uncertain what I loved. The future veiled and voiceless, a heart gone silent, numb. In loneliness, love and longing ate at me day and night. Distracted and depressed, I roamed the tracks of life. Meaningless motions, strife, a homeless heart. Who can endure such friendless sky and hearth? The light of the world, the Logos, made known to me within, and certainly how swiftly the darkness comprehends. I find myself as human, first by this transformed, and India blossoms lovingly, even in the north. Life, one hour burst of loving, the world sprayed forth in bliss, an herb that heals the wounded, full, free, each heartbeat blessed. For all the thousand gifts, I remain a humble child, sure to have her with us whenever to come round. Oh, travel all the paths to find those lost and blind. Stretch out your hand to each and welcome them. Be kind. Heaven here is with us on earth and recognized. For those who know in spirit, to them the secret flies. Sin, that oft-repeated lie, engraved upon the mind, deluded us to wander, lost, bewildered, blind. Life, a prison sentence, hard labor, human shame, and heaven, cold and distant, spoke only death and pain. The heart, life's blessed source spring, polluted and made dread. Whoever dared to question was given stones for bread. The earth bound fast with iron, a tortured victim's chest, a sword of death pressed tightly to every hopeless head. Then came to us a Savior, full human, logos free, to kindle living fire in every child of Eve. Heaven opened, we beheld our ancient home. Hope renewed the promise that ye shall be as gods. Sin fled, delusion vanished, error disappeared. We walk with joy, speak boldly the truth to children's ears. Life sanctified becomes a blissful dream, enraptured, loved, embodied, death in life redeemed. And still in wondrous splendor, the loved one wholly keeps, an image of redemption, thorns for which we weep. So welcome every human who shares by inner sight the garden of the Logos, the fruit of paradise. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in Romanticism and for your interest in the section for the Literary Arts and Humanities. Good night.